He appeared to have gone days without eating, standing above the deceased elder there was blood on his knuckles, however, when those on the ridge, 100 warriors emerged, the following morning, each individual in a border settlement, would realize they had saw something far bigger than a simple deed of generosity. Briggs, Sawyer behind the wooden crates, crouching outside the trade post owned by Murphy, his tummy rubbed into his back as if two rough leather pieces, the sun brutally pounded on the dusty main street, and he detected the scent of the new bread from the shop, a fragrance that caused his empty stomach to tighten with intense hunger. His clothing was loose, repaired and reattached on his slender frame until they resembled a blanket more than appropriate clothing. Through the filthy window, he observed the shopkeeper, a cruel-eyed, thick-set man disputing with an elderly indigenous man standing with taciturn dignity in spite of the attack. The worn hands of the elders clutched a tiny leather sack. His braided silver hair with traditional beads that were exposed to the intense sunshine pouring through the window. "I informed you, no trade with your kind, people before," the proprietor of the business spat, his tone carrying through the flimsy. "Walls, take your things and leave before I call the sheriff." Sawyer clenched his teeth as he observed the shoulders of the elders square with a silent sense of pride. The voice of the elderly man stayed composed and spoke with an accent, English on his need for medication, ailing granddaughter, making a lovely crafted goods in return, however. The owner's face only became more flushed with each word. "The youngster has witnessed enough brutality in." It took him 16 years to recognize it right away. He was familiar with such expression. And look, he had observed the expressions of men who kicked stray dogs simply because they were able to. Something twisted in his throat, chilly and bitter, chest while observing the elder's honor falling apart piece by piece. However, Sawyer was unaware of the fact that this moment would initiate activities that would rattle the fundamental underpinnings of the tiny frontier community, and that the decision, what he was going to do, would reverberate through the ancestral grounds for many generations to come. Sawyer's heart pounded on his ribs while observing two additional men. "Go into the trading post, men," he acknowledged as Clyde Harrove's employee hands. Their boots roared through the glass and on the wooden floor. He could observe them encircling the senior native men, surrounding wounded like wolves. "Pray, old dude, you're deaf." "Harrove," Clyde appeared behind the counter. He clasped his big fists at his sides. "You were instructed to leave by Murphy here. Perhaps you need assistance comprehending." The elders remained composed, but Sawyer could observe the strain in his grizzled hands. "My granddaughter is ill. I just request medication. These things are valuable. Far more than I require." Clyde chuckled, a sharp noise that produced Sawyer feels uneasy. Valuable. This garbage. He grabbed the leather satchel from the hands of the elders and discarded its items on the counter, lovely strewn, with beads on the wooden surface, complex designs that communicated of many hours of meticulous workmanship. However, Clyde then took a step that made Sawyer's blood become frozen. He swept his cross the counter with an arm, sending the priceless objects falling to the ground, and firmly pressed his boot down on a fragile necklace that most likely took months to produce. At last, the elder's calm broken, he let out a sound from his throat. It was more of a gasp than a shout, but something that mentioned profound spiritual suffering. Suddenly, Sawyer noticed his own image in the elderly man's eyes. The same hunger, the same powerlessness, the same profound understanding that the world could be unimaginably harsh to anyone who possessed nothing. Sawyer's slender physique shuddered as he rubbed up against the wall. Every instinct is screaming at him to flee, conceal himself, and live as he had always been. He was only a thin child, having nothing to show but the garments on his back. How could he conceivably defeat 3 mature men? However, Clyde extended his hand in the direction of the something inside Sawyer's face. Elder broke like a parched branch, and he discovered himself approaching the door before his body and intellect might catch up. Murphy's trade post's door exploded. It slammed open with such power, clanging the glass against the wall windows. Sawyer was standing in the entrance. His heaving chest gave the impression of a scary bird that was alive. His pallid face was reddened by resolve, and his hands trembled, his voice cut slightly. At his sides, through the astonished quiet as a blade. "Don't bother him." The trio of men turned with expressions in his direction. From astonishment to laughter, Clyde, as Harrove took in the information, his eyebrows went up. The way the boy looked, the threadbare attire, the recessed cheeks, the desperate thinness that was mentioned as well. A lot of hungry nights, a slow, ruthless smile dispersed over his face. All right, Clyde's voice asked. "What do we have here?" Oozed fictitious worry. "You, boy. It appears that you haven't had a satisfying dinner. Why don't you run along beforehand in weeks? You fall." Sawyer's legs felt as though water below him, and his heart was racing so intensely that he was certain everyone in the room could hear it. However, he made an additional step, moving ahead, putting himself between the Clyde's hired men and Elder. The indigenous elder gave him a startled gaze and something that could have been considered respectful. His black eyes flickered. "I uttered." Sawyer reiterated. "Leave him alone," his voice more forcefully this time, in spite of how his entire body shuddered. "He is finished. Not a problem." One of Clyde's men, a hefty man whose arms resembled tree trunks, gave a rough laugh. "The child believes he's a hero of some sort. Perhaps we ought to instruct. What happens to heroes in this area?" The elder's voice was quiet, his worn, extending a hand to Sawyer's shoulder. "This is not your battle. Young one, these men can be harmful." Sawyer, however, shrugged, away from the tender touch. His mouth dropped, with unyielding resolve. "No, sir. That's precisely what I'm fighting for." His gaze never departed from Clyde's face as he went on, talking. "I've had a lot of hunger periods. I understand how it feels when no one will assist you, when people gaze upon you. You seem insignificant. But I've never had, 'Can someone defend me?' Clyde's." The laughter subsided and was replaced by something darker. "Dude, you're making a huge error. Are you aware of who you are conversing with, regardless of who you are?" Sawyer answered, taken aback by his own courage. "What counts is what you're doing, and your actions are incorrect." There was silence in the room, but for the faraway sounds and the sound of breathing outside the street, Sawyer could sense, dripping perspiration down his back, and his lips had dried out completely, but he remained firm. He considered all, the moments when he'd desired someone, anybody, would intervene and assist him when he was being ignored or pushed aside by shops and eateries. But what transpired next would put every bit of the young man had courage because the type of man Clyde Hargrove was, who gave up a fight, particularly not in the face of a half-starved boy who appeared to be barely able to stand erect. The visage of Clyde Hargrove changed into something unsightly and threatening. As he approached Sawyer, resonating with his bulky boots on the wooden floor, the boy looked menacing, could detect the unpleasant breath of the man, and observed the system of shattered blood vessels across his nose, indications of excessive nights spent consuming alcohol to the detriment of conscience he may have had in the past. "Boy, you want to be a hero, Clyde's?" The voice fell to a perilous murmur. "Allow me to demonstrate what happens to heroes in my town." He swung his huge fist ruthlessly in Sawyer's direction. However, the boy had become swift while he was living on the streets, sensed the wind, and ducked just in time. Clyde's hair, ruffled from the punch, momentum propelled him ahead, and he staggered a little, his face turning red, with anger and shame. The older moved forward and spoke in an agitated tone. "There is no need for violence, please. We'll depart in silence." But Clyde was too now, rationalize.